heading over in my Bible says Joseph's success in Egypt. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites, who had taken him down there. And the Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did prosper in his hand.
So Joseph found favor in his sight and became his personal servant. And he made him overseer over his house, and all that he owned he put in his charge. It came about that from the time he made him overseer in his house and over all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned, in the house and in the field. So he left everything he owned in Joseph's charge, and with him there he did not concern himself with anything except the food which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. It came about after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, Behold, with me here my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put all that he owns in my charge.
No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house.
When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought a Hebrew to us to make sport of us. He came into me to lie with me, and I screamed. When he heard that I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled and went outside. So she left his garment beside her until his master came home. Then she spoke to him in these words: "The Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came in to me to make sport of me. And as I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled outside."
There you go. Thank you, guys. So to summarize these 18 verses, we can summarize them in 5 words, right? We can summarize this whole 18 verses in 5 words, and you're going to see the progression of the story. Word number 1, trial. Word number 1, trial. The second word is touch, touch. The third word is testimony, testimony. The next word is temptation, temptation. And the last word is triumph, triumph. So we have trial, which is first one. This is how the story begins. Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. How you deal with the trial in your life will dictate the rest of the course of your life. Everybody agrees?
Mm-hmm.
Because as everybody was reading this, he ended up triumphing in the end of the story, right? So if you just interpret this passage literally, you can summarize them in those 5 words. But as you know, we want to go deeper beyond the literal. So this opening verse is revealing a whole lot to you and I. The name Joseph means God will add. God will add. So here's the first question we need to ask ourselves. Are you content in your life right now spiritually? Because if you are, God will not add. But if you're not content and you want God to add, guess what's going to happen next? Trial. You follow what I'm saying? This is how God works. Because through trial, he prunes us, right? Our character in particular. So Potiphar, the name Potiphar means priest of Ra. So everybody here knows that the Egyptians worship this sun god called Ra. So Potiphar is a symbol. Potiphar is a symbol of a leader, somebody that the devil has put in charge of one of his domain, for example, right? Because it says right here, an Egyptian officer, the captain of the bodyguard. So we're not dealing with a little demon, if you want to put it that way. We're dealing with an entity symbolic in this name Potiphar, who is in charge of, it says right here, captain of the bodyguard, right? So notice here the word Egypt. In the English Bible, the word Egypt doesn't tell much. But if you look at the Hebrew word translated as Egypt, Mitzrayim, Mitzrayim means double strongholds, double strongholds. And you're going to see how the meaning of the word Mitzrayim, double stronghold, plays out in the rest of the story. Ishmaelite comes from the word or name Ishmael. Ishmael means El has heard, or El, God, will hear. So Ishmaelites right here are symbolic of the brothers of Joseph, right? If you remember the story, the Ishmaelite came out from Ishmael. Ishmael was the half brother of Isaac. So they're connected somehow, some way, right? So the Ishmaelites are our brother, our half brother, Christian half brothers, that for whatever reason have given in to this captain of the bodyguard, Potiphar, to where eventually they were used in this trial that Joseph found himself in. But we all know that God's sovereignty is behind everything that we go through in life. So this opening verse is very important. As I said before, the first question we need to ask ourselves is, are you content spiritually? If you are, nothing's going to happen. But if you're not content, God will allow a trial for you to go through. And if you deal with that trial the way God wants you to, the end of it is a triumph beyond measure, beyond belief, so to speak. So what's going to happen right here? The word Pharaoh right here means great house, great house. So as you remember when we were reading about this, right? From the prison to the palace, that's implied in this word Pharaoh. So sometimes the kind of trial that you and I go through, on the surface of it, seems like a success. On the surface of it, seems very worldly. This is what this word Egypt, Mitzrayim, double stronghold. We got to be careful. If you want to grow spiritually and you prayed about it, God would allow things to happen in your life that look to you like a trial. And in most cases, it's like a success, it's like an achievement. How you handle that is going to dictate the end result, the rest of your life. So far, so good. So there is a lot in this opening verse to unpack beyond the literal. But if you just process this first one on the literal surface of it, if you want to grow and you talk to God about it in prayer, or you desire to grow spiritually, God is going to send a trial. How you discern and how you process that trial will dictate the outcome and the direction of the rest of your life. So far, so good. Now notice right here God's sovereignty in verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph. That's what I meant when I said the second word is touch. So when Joseph said to God, yes, I want to grow, we know that Joseph was a special child, right? You remember the story? He had a dream or two, and his brothers got jealous because of those dreams. So we know from the beginning, Joseph was favored by God because he was given by God those dreams that God did not give to his brothers. So the hand of God was upon Joseph. So God's touch has always been with Joseph. And it's very important for you and I to discern. Are we walking with Jesus? Because if we are, he's always with us. And the implication of that is no matter the trial, he is there with us. And this is exactly what's played out in the story as we unpack the rest of the verses, right? So from verse 2 onward, See if we can draw out from these verses Joseph's testimony because of the touch of God in his life. And notice right here the way Moses writes this story for you and I. He is recording Joseph's testimony because of God's touch in his life from two perspectives. And it has a lot to do with this word Egypt, double stronghold. Because these two perspectives are exactly the strongholds that we're going to unpack later on, right? So let's see if we can draw out, beginning with verse 2, the kind of testimony that God has given Joseph because of his task. How about verse 2 right here? There are two testimonies that God, Yahweh, has given Joseph. What are they?
Well, he's successful,
Yes.
and the Lord was with him.
But he was in the house of his master.
Yes. So that's the two testimony regarding Joseph. This is very important because, as I said before, in writing this narrative for you and I, Moses is giving you and I two perspectives of his testimony. Let's move on. Okay. How about verse 3? What kind of testimony is Moses writing for you and I here about
The Lord
Joseph?
is with him, and that everything that Joseph did prospered because of his hand.
But notice these two words, folks. The master saw. His master saw. So now the testimony is shifted. It's not centering upon Joseph. It's centering upon this captain, this master, right? This is very important. What do I mean by this? Every one of us here can brag and boast about our testimony. That does not count until somebody else sees God's hands in our life and testifies of that. That's very important right there. So his master saw what? Saw that Yahweh was with Joseph, and what else? Yahweh caused all that Joseph did to prosper in his hand. So you see right there, the two testimony about Joseph are countered by the two testimony from his master. That's implied in this word Egypt, double stronghold. So far, so good? Rob, so far, so good? Yeah. So, verse 4, what kind of testimony Joseph has?
That he's loyal, and Potiphar found favor in him and gave him to rule over the house, the overseer of the house.
So there are 4 testimonies of Joseph in this verse
So
alone.
he becomes a personal servant.
Yes,
He's put in charge of everything he owns.
yes,
Put in charge of his house.
yes. And
Found
Personal servant.
found favor in his sight.
of his master,
Yes.
right? See, it's right there for us to draw out. We don't have to add into it. We just have to pay attention what Moses is trying to tell us. Moses is telling you and I in verse 4, there are 4 testimony about Joseph. Number 1, he found favor in the sight of his master, right? Everybody agree? Number 2, he became his personal servant. Now, this is huge in this culture. For a non-Egyptian to be made a personal servant to somebody like Potiphar, this is huge. But this is intentional in this story, just to see the hands of God and the touch of God upon Joseph. What is this telling you and I? You may be a minority in this neighborhood. You may be a minority in your workplace. You may be the only Christian in your family. But if you walk with God, if his hands is upon you, if his touch is upon you, he can do to you what he does to Joseph right here, making you the personal servant to the very person that God is targeting, right? Number 3, notice right here, Joseph was made overseer. Did you not notice right here the progression of his testimony, folks? This is powerful. This should motivate you and I to want to walk with God, to want to be the kind of witnesses to Jesus. And lastly, all that the master owned, the master put Joseph in charge of. Think about that for a second. Now, in verse 5, it came about. Whenever you see this phrase in the Bible, it came about. You know God is behind that. It didn't just happen. accidentally, incidentally. God is behind this. Notice what it says right here. From the time the master made Joseph overseer in his house and over all that he's on, which is the repetition of the last part of verse 4. Notice right here the testimony shifted, Derek, right? Instead of focusing on Joseph, who is focusing now?
Master.
House. Notice the one word right there. The Lord blessed the Egyptian's house, the master, the Egyptian's house, on account of Joseph. The Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned. And then notice that, in the house and in the field. Now stop right there for a second. If you walk with God, whoever it is around you who is not a Christian, like this Egyptian, notice the blessing of God in your life filtered through you, goes through you to those people who are not Christian. Notice three things are here. Number one, right? The Egyptian's house, right there, upon all that he owned. And then Moses breaks it down, in the house and in the field. In the house and in the field. Wouldn't all of us still love to have this kind of testimony? Is this no wonder his name means God will add? And because of his faithfulness and obedience, Yahweh just keep adding into his life, one testimony after another, right? And in verse 6 right here, notice right here, it doesn't get any better than this. A Hebrew working for an Egyptian, to the point where the Egyptian, all he cared about is what? The food he ate. The basic things in life is all that he cared about. Remember, if you go back to verse 1, who is this Egyptian? The captain of the bodyguard. He'd be like whoever is in charge of the Secret Service to President Trump. That's what it means, the captain. So if you were, for example, one of the Secret Service, you're the only Christian, the rest of the Secret Service were not Christian. But because of your faithfulness, because of your obedience, God's hand and touch will filter through you to the rest of the Secret Service, even to the head of the Secret Service, to his house and everything that he owned in his house and in his field. That's powerful right there.
I want to ask you a question that
Yeah.
I wanted to ask since we read this. Now, did she do this because she was just angry that he didn't sleep with her? I mean, this is just literally from reading.
Mhm.
Or did she do this because, there was a plan, a master plan other than her own,
So the answer is, if you process this just literally, it's the first part of your question. Because he was angry at him, because he didn't get from him what he wanted to get out of him. Yeah. So, but that's a great question, because sometimes, again, if you process a passage, a story in the Bible, literally, you got to stick with the context. Stephen?
Saying he looked at him with desire.
Yeah.
We didn't even get there, but
Not with
you
ill
were just
intent.
explaining of Joseph changing the attitudes of the army. I just look at this guy, Derek, coming and showing up. After 30 years of working with him, we were buddies. We were good, but we didn't become intimate until recently. And then Derek tells me this morning of another guy who would be off the maps for me that he spoke with yesterday that took interest in what he had to hear. So, I mean, he cracked open the door yesterday, and it just blows me away that,
Well,
I call this a divine intervention, but this is actually this is playing out what God's doing right here.
nothing is by coincidence when it comes to God, even what you just shared, because of the testimony of Jesus in his life and his obedience and faithfulness, like we're unpacking right here in Joseph's life. This can happen to every one of us life. But the question we need to ask ourselves is, are we being faithful? Are we being obedient despite the trial? Notice how this story begins with a trial. Joseph found himself sold, so to speak, right? So far, so good.
Right, but this story began for him long before this,
I know,
because he's
it's
been in
trial
so
after
many
trial.
trials. Yeah, from being thrown in the pit on. So
Yeah.
Once the deception occurred, then, right?
Yeah, but this is the pivotal part of his life, because had he had sex with the master's wife,
Yeah.
we wouldn't be sitting here talking about
Right.
this.
He
Right.
overcame some serious sin. I mean,
Right.
Right, but
You know, I mean,
if you originally lashed out at his brothers for starting that ball rolling,
He wouldn't be
it
here.
would have been verse 2 never would have happened,
Yeah.
you know? That was verse 1, dropping him in the well, and he was just, oh, okay.
See, what is this telling us, folks? If you cannot overcome a temptation, you're not gonna go nowhere. You're not gonna
Yeah.
go. You're not gonna go deeper. Bill?
Yeah, that just I had this discussion about 2 weeks ago. You know, it seems like every time we have an opportunity to serve God, there's always a trial that follows.
Yes.
You always have a trial. And so many times when, you know, when we are faithful, sometimes it does cost us. It costs us, but we still have to remain faithful. But
Yeah.
it just always seems like when that door opens, there's a trial. You might not see it, but you know, God does test your obedience. He tests your faithfulness.
Yeah.
You know,
But
that's
it-
just where we just had that discussion 2 weeks ago. I can't believe we're reading this right now.
yeah. But if we're faithful and obedient, more doors are opened by God.
Yeah.
what I think about this trial is this isn't like a normal trial either when it comes to like a woman. It's not like a woman saw you somewhere and puts her number on a napkin next to you. You're in the house, she's trying to pull your clothes off, right? And it's like he overcame a serious trial of doing this.
Yeah. When we get to what he did, it's gonna become even more evident.
And being the head captain's wife, she was probably a very good-looking woman.
Absolutely.
He's not gonna,
Absolutely.
the head guy in charge is not gonna be marrying some ugly woman.
Absolutely.
No.
So,
See, those are good insights, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm stimulating, I'm motivating, I'm challenging, I'm provoking your thinking process. When we read a story like this, don't just get stuck in the literal. Let your imagination run wild. Because when you do that, you get deeper, you get more out of it, right? If there's any verse in the story, it's this one we're going to talk about right now. Now, Joseph was handsome. Notice these two things: form and appearance. Now, if you look at the notes right there, these two things basically means the same. He was beautiful in the sight of the master's wife. Now, this is very important, folks. Notice in the story, there is nothing in the story Moses telling you and I that Joseph is aware of his beauty. Did you get that?
Yep, but it wasn't ego.
Yes, nothing in the story by Moses tells you and I Joseph was even aware, at the slightest awareness, of how handsome he was in form and in appearance. But bring it home to you and I. Don't we sometimes in the past, in our sinful life, use our form and appearance to sin and brag and boast about it? This is how you know you've moved from immaturity to maturity. Despite the handsomeness that God has blessed you with, you ignore that, you don't exploit that, you don't use that to your own benefits. But still, despite that, Joseph found himself in this very, very crucial predicament in his life. Now, these two words, form and appearance, Derek, this goes back to this word Egypt, double stronghold. And then can I tell you something here? Every one of us men, when it comes to our temptation, is going to be a double stronghold kinds of temptation. Outside and inside. Outward and inward. The temptation that you and I face will come from either outside or inside. Appearance, outside. Form, built in. How we are born on the inside.
but isn't every temptation both always?
Always.
Because it's something is out there tempting you to, and then the thought process inside is tempting you. Do I do it? Do I not do it? And you're struggling that inside.
But notice how many Christians are not even aware of their sources of temptation, outside and inside. Most of them think it's coming from the outside appearance, when in reality, they themselves put themselves in a tempting situation. This is why in the Lord's Prayer we were taught by Jesus, please don't let us enter ourselves into those tempting situations. This is a make or a break for a lot of Christians. When they begin to realize that temptation do not necessarily come from Satan, do not necessarily come from the world, simply summarized, do not necessarily come from outside, but from inside. That's 50% of the battle is won right there. See this one sentence right here? It's very revealing. And how many times we read Bibles like these sentences and we just skip through it, right? We just skip through it. Now we have a twist in the story, beginning with verse 7. It came about. Did you notice the same phrase is used in verse 5? So now you're going to have a twist in the story. What? His master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, lie with me. What is this telling you and I? When it comes to sexual temptation, number one, it's subtle. It's subtle. Joseph was caught off guard. How do we know that? Well, if you look at the verse before, Moses was telling you and I, Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And as we broke that down, right, Joseph was not even aware. Suddenly, subtly, his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph. So temptation, sexual temptation, is always sudden. It's always subtle. And it's always succinct. Notice what she says. Lie with me. Now, we say, well, Joseph could just say no. But remember here, this is Potiphar's wife. This is like President Trump's #1 servant in the White House. And you were working there. And then this #1 servant in the White House wife came to you out of nowhere, out of the blues, and demand out of you sexual, whatever you want to call it, right? Subtle, sudden, straightforward, succinct. That's what we got out of this verse right here. But how many of us men are aware of how sexual temptation comes to us? Suddenly, subtly, succinctly, straightforwardly. Lie with me. She didn't, you know what I mean? She didn't sugarcoat, right? When it comes to sexual temptation, it's always seductive. That's the other word, seductive. Haven't you noticed, man? Ugly looking women is not going to cause you to want to have sex with them. Am I right? It's always been the nice looking one, right? Am I right?
Well, it depends how many beers I
I was gonna say, when 3 a.m. hits, it's a different
Yeah, they get prettier later in the night.
See, this is why this verse 7 came after. Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. What is the Holy Spirit telling you and I right here? The more handsome you are, the kind of temptation when it comes to the women will be the more beautiful the woman is.
Plus, being the master's wife, doesn't she have a bit of authority over him?
Yeah,
So it's almost like a clean that up,
Yeah.
come lie with me. You know, that I'm ordering you what to do.
so can you see now the pressure he was under? He couldn't just, it's not a servant, it's not a maid, it's not a hired maid. This is the big head's wife right here. So imagine the pressure right here. But notice how he dealt with this temptation. So far we talk about trial, we talk about God's touch, we talk about his testimony. Now we're talking about his temptation. But how is Joseph dealing with his temptation? Verse 8, he refused. Notice right here, the steadfastness of Joseph. He doesn't play around with it. Right from the get-go, very clearly by Moses, he refused. He doesn't think about it. He doesn't talk about it. He doesn't reason it out. He refused. That should be the first thing we must do, man, when it comes to sexual temptation. Shut it down right there and then. Walk away. Don't even think about it twice.
And one thing that helps with that is don't put yourself in situations where, like, like if you're at, say, someone's house and everybody's outside, don't put your wife in your kid, yourself in with the man's wife in the kitchen alone and stuff like that. You can help take those temptations away in your own actions too.
Yeah. And that's exactly what's going to happen next. Notice so far right here, it does not mention Joseph being with her alone, right? But that's exactly what's going to happen next, right? So it says right here, he refused. But how did Joseph deal with his temptation? He used his mind. He used his logic. It says right here, said to his master's wife, behold, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. He has put all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater in his house than I. He has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then I could do this great evil and sin against God? Bill?
That sticks out to me. That phrase, how then could I do this evil sin against God? Not as master. He identified with God immediately. That's the most beautiful part of it. He could have said my master. He could have said, all of Egypt or whatever, but he said God. It's sinning against God, not his master, not anything else. Yes, that sticks out. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful identity that he has.
Stephen?
I don't know. I was going to stop what he was saying.
But notice how he's logically processing this, right? So he's basically starting his reasoning, if you want to put it that way, to the master's wife by saying, look, your husband has been good to me. He's given me all this extra, so to speak. There's no way I'm going to betray your husbands, right? But then he brings her. Notice the invite by Joseph to these wives about God, right, Stephen?
Well, I mean, I'm reflecting back on me. Now that I am where I am in my walk, I realize the sin doesn't happen on the first glance. It happens on the second look for me. The first glance, I mean, they walk in the room, you're all going to see that. But then the fact that I now my response is where it was an opportunity for me. Mine is, it is about sinning against God. But then after that, I realized another time that I'd sin against my wife. You know what I'm saying? But God, I can't give this the second breath now because of where I am with God. And then God will really, but if you do, buddy, you're going to hurt your wife again. You're going to break your heart with your wife's again. So it went from the spiritual to an internal kind of thing, and the taking it in, where I long for that second look back in my old man.
Yeah. So this is exactly what Moses is telling us right here. But I want to draw attention to what Joseph said right here. Because you are his wife. How many times when you go to social function, whether a wedding, whether a celebration, you find yourself man alone talking to somebody else's wife? I'm going to play this out right here for all of us to get this. Suppose that wife of somebody is more beautiful than your own wife. You find yourself alone talking to the wife of somebody. If you just remember what Joseph said right here, because you are his wife. Have that awareness in our mind. Yes, she's more beautiful than my wife, but she's not my wife. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When I read this, how then could I do this great evil and sin against God? That's the part that's going to really make you loathe yourself. You know what I mean? In the end, is that you fell short for God. You know what I mean?
Well, I like how he referenced, my master does not concern himself. So he's giving that guy the title.
Yeah.
But there at the end, he reveals who his real master is God.
Yeah.
He's the master of the house where I live in, but the master of my life is God, and that's who I follow.
Right.
Great commentary.
Yeah.
Right. There are two double strongholds that Moses wants us to get right here. Number one is exactly what Derek just shared. Who is your master? In this situation, physically, naturally speaking, Potiphar was Joseph's master. But in his heart and in his mind and in his soul and in his spirit, The only master that mattered to Joseph was God. That's the first double stronghold. The second double stronghold is right here. The wife of his master. Notice right here, up until chapter 39, nothing is told about Joseph having a girlfriend, being married, and what have you. This is the first sexual temptation. But he had that discernment in him. Look, I'm not going to fall victim to my flesh. This is implied by the use of this word wife, physicality. Why? Because Joseph was spiritually married to Yahweh from day one. This is the other double stronghold right here. Wherever you are, folks, you have to remind yourself, like most of us, if we are Christian, we need to understand one thing. We are the wife of Jesus Christ, the bridegroom to the church.
I really love the sound of all of that. Right? That has to be the most important thing.
Yes.
Amen.
See, right? If we just have this awareness, man, wherever you are, when you're being tempted sexually, you are the wife to Jesus Christ because you are the church. The church is the bride. Jesus Christ is the bridegroom to the church. Notice right here how we apply what Joseph said, because you are his wife from a spiritual perspective to deal with sexual temptation. Bill?
No.
Okay.
You know, and if it's that solid of a relationship with God, that shouldn't even be on your plate, you know?
Well, this is why
Right.
I'm challenging our thinking process. Yes, we are born as men. But if you just see yourself as the wife of Jesus Christ, it will save you a lot of headache and heartache from sexual temptation.
You know, one thing that I noticed too, and I've always loved this one thing that you taught us about, and it came about. I just love those words that it came about, right? So it says, and it came about after these events that his master's wife. So that to me is saying that God put that trial in your life to see where your heart is really at.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Because notice the sequence of this story, folks. Trial, God's thoughts, testimony. Then what happens next? Temptation.
Yeah.
See these 5 steps in this story?
And I'll tell you what, there's the double stronghold, right? Between trial and temptation.
Yeah,
You
you
know
have
what
to
I'm
make a
saying?
choice.
God allows you to go into that trial, but he didn't put the lustful thoughts in your mind. He said, here, now what are you gonna do with it?
See, without Stephen realizing when he said it's double stronghold, that's very true. Trial is from the outside. Temptation is from the inside. If you cannot overcome anything and everything from the outside, you're not going to be able to overcome anything and everything from the inside.
You know, the funny thing is he actually still got punished for this, even though he didn't do something wrong, but the punishment wasn't really that bad, and he became victorious in the end anyway.
So what is that telling you and I when it comes to dealing with temptation? We are going to successfully overcome, but there is a price to pay.
Yeah.
There is a price to pay. Our pride, our reputation, our ego, our ambition, right? Good so far?
Really, then there's no price to pay, because with God, we should have none of that. Okay? We should not have no pride. No
That
ego.
goes back to verse 2. Yahweh was with Joseph. Do we believe that God is with us?
With us, right.
Despite the trial, despite the temptation, right?
No weapon formed against me shall prosper.
Yeah.
Temptation or lust of others.
Now, back to what Joseph says right here at the end of verse 9. How then could I do this great evil? Do we see sexual temptation as evil?
Oh, yeah.
So I would guess that for most men, this literal part, where a woman is pursuing him, easy delineation of this is evil. It's the standard that Jesus said, that to look upon a woman is with lust in your eyes is just the same as doing the act.
Yeah.
that is where I think most men trip up, is that because we live in a world where sex is in your face. You know, it's not that, I don't know about anybody here, but I don't go to parties and have women hit on me. I think my one, well, I don't, but but it's the sexual, it's the thoughts and the things that are thrown at you that, while it's not literally a physical human being, it is a thought that is just as bad. You know, that I think men tend to say, that's okay. You know, it's not, I'm not really cheating, whereas Jesus said, no, you are cheating.
Yeah.
You know?
So let me ask you this: is the temptation the evil, or is it where you go with it and take it after that temptation? The evil?
Great question.
Well, it's just that.
Yeah, that is a good question.
It's that thought. If you can look at her and say, what a beautiful woman, and then you're like, oh, I wonder what it'd be like to kiss her.
Yeah, there you go.
So there you go.
Right
You're
there.
not kissing her. You're not moving in to kiss her. You just have that thought. I wonder what it would be like. So.
See, go ahead, Sean.
I'm sorry, I wanted to say something because this is just a kind of an odd thing that I find, but I'm not a Facebookaholic, but I do go on. I post stuff about the president. I hope to influence people, whether I do or not. No, seriously. But as soon as you get on, I don't know if you guys get these, but there's women pictures
Oh, yeah,
and I'm like saying, like, now when I look at those kind of pictures, it used to be I'd look at those pictures
Mhm.
and you know, but now I say,
Now they're just in my way.
yeah, no, it's like, you know, that's
Don't give 'em
somebody's daughter, somebody's whatever, that's putting their body out there in front of everybody who opens this thing, and I just don't understand how you can do that to yourself as a woman. You know what I mean? That really gets to me, and it's like it's not attractive anymore. You know what I mean? It has an ugliness.
Yeah.
So
You know?
all that you guys have just shared right here is in this last part of this verse 9. His wife, evil, sin. So how do we overcome sexual temptation, man? Number one, just as Sean was just saying right there, the woman that you're looking lustfully at is somebody else's wife, somebody else's niece, somebody else's daughter, somebody else's, you fill in the blank. That's step number one. Step number two, consider that lustful look at the woman evil. Step number three, this is which is very important. If you fall victim to that, then you've missed God's mark. Wife, evil, sin. This is the secret to overcoming sexual temptation.
Because when Jesus was in the desert for 40 days, it says he was tempted in every way. He was tempted in every way, but he never crossed over. There was no evil in him. I mean, he had to put all of that in there: money, flesh, lust, all of that, by all. And he never gave it a breath. He never gave it life. And that's where I think it turns from the temptation, goes toward evil.
So the next time you come across a good-looking woman on your cell phone, if especially she's half undressed, that's somebody else's wife, that's somebody else's daughter, that's somebody else's niece. And then you must look at the picture as evil. Until you pass through these two steps. If you don't pass through these two steps, you're going to sin. But if you pass through these two steps, you're going to have this awareness Joseph has. If I do what you ask me to do, lie with me, I will sin against God. Right? So far, so good. But it gets worse. Notice right here in verse 10. She spoke to Joseph. How did she spoke to Joseph?
Day after day.
That means sexual temptation is not just going to be a one-time event for men.
Yeesh.
Sexual temptation is going to come day in and day out, night in and night out. But how should we deal with that? The answer is given. Joseph did not listen to her. Haven't you noticed something? Those pictures whisper to your ears and to my ears. It's okay. It's everywhere. Every man is looking at it. Every man is doing it.
Yeah.
Right? So sexual temptation is sustained. Sustained. That's what it means right here. Day after day. And in order to deal with that, we too must be sustained by the presence of God. Going back to verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph. It is when you walk away from God, this sexual temptation, that is sustained and sudden and subtle and succinct and straightforward. And later on, we're going to come across another word that's very important. That's the only way you're going to overcome that, if you stay with Jesus. We're going to talk about this Sunday, about walking with Jesus, right? So, verse 11, here you go again. Now it happened. Now it happened. Check this out. One day, Joseph went into the house to do his work. None of the men of the household was there inside. If you find yourself to be the only man amidst a group of women, get out.
Hold on there. Hold on.
Don't play Jesus there.
Hold on there.
That seems counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Right.
How am I supposed to find a wife?
Eric can't do that. Yeah.
Don't think you're gonna save those women.
Then you gotta leave.
Don't play Jesus thinking and believing God sent you there to be their Messiah. No, you're gonna be eaten.
Been there, done that.
Right? And here it gets worse in verse 12. She caught him by his garment. Now look, if you overcome temptation, the first 5 steps, don't think and believe very quickly that you won the war. Notice right here the intensity and the scope of sexual temptation. See, symbolic in this word see. She caught him by his garment, and she demands again, lie with me. But notice how Joseph dealt with this. He left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside.
All right, so let me ask you this.
Evidence.
Yeah, but the garment is usually just a one piece of cloth, right? Maybe with a belt holding it on. Doesn't say the belt, and so it's saying that she took his clothes off, right?
Mhm.
And he ran outside naked.
Well, in this case,
That's how I would read it.
yeah, go back to where it started, right? When it says right here that he made him overseer over his house. Potiphar, that is. Egyptian, if you just Google out the way they dress, especially when it comes to working for somebody like a man of this caliber, you have more clothing on you instead of just a one-piece clothing.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So when I see garment, all I did was I picked up my phone and my wife saw the text to another woman, whether it was lustful or not. I left my garment with that woman.
Great insight.
You
right
know,
there.
I can justify it all I want that there's a text that my wife found from another woman. And I can justify, no, we're only friends. We're only friends. How many times I've done that?
Yeah. So let me tell you something right here. Here's the revelation right here. When it says right here, he left his garment in her hand. Who is reaching out to the garment? She is.
She is. Yeah.
You know what this tells me? If you fall victim to sexual temptation, that garment that you left behind is going to be used by the devil to haunt you, to taunt you, to remind you, to perpetually bring you down spiritually. Here, I have the evidence. That's what it
Yeah.
says.
Yeah.
That's what it says. Right? So far, so good. 13. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside. See, this is very important. 14. She called to the men of her household. She called to the men of her household and said to them, see, he has brought in a Hebrew to us to make sport of us. He came into me. Notice the nature of Satan. Accusing, accusation. She turned the story around. It was her that told him to lie with her, but now she's turning the story around, telling the man or the people in her household, Joseph was the one that demanded to lie with her. And notice the drama, if you want to put it that way. And I scream, and I scream. When he heard that I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled and went outside. What is this telling you and I, folks? Be careful. Be careful in any temptation. Do not give the devil facts. Fact. What is the fact? The garment is the fact. The garment is the proof. The garment is the evidence.
In fact, the blood after that is also a secondary evidence.
Yes. And notice with the mention of the word scream twice, raise my voice. What is this telling you and I beyond the literal? The devil is going to exaggerate on that evidence that you left behind. The devil is going to exploit on that evidence that you left behind. And the devil is going to bring his minions, the men that work in that house. The devil is going to bring all his demonic minions to make sure that he gets you and he gets you good. Verse 16, she left his garment beside her until his master come home. So we're coming to the climax of the story, right? Then she spoke to the master, her husband. Did you notice something right here, by the way? When we go back to, for example, verse 14, did you notice how she referred to her husband? She, he. She's speaking of her own husband in the third personal pronoun. Did you notice that? All right, let's read verse 14. She called to the men of her household and said to them, see, he, referring to her husband. He.
Right, not Mark.
Right.
Whatever.
She did not even mention the husband's name. She refers to him as the third in the third personal pronoun. What is this telling
Wait,
you?
what's the significance of that, Paul? What's that significance that she referred to him as he?
The significance of that is if you resist any temptation, your resistance alone is going to break up the demonic forces.
Okay.
The army of the demons. Because remember, from the get-go, we're not dealing with just somebody, Joe. We're dealing with Potiphar, priest of the sun god Ra. Right? So that little detail is very important. We're not just dealing with a minion here. We're dealing with priests of the sun god Ra. And if you're faithful to God, if you're obedient to God, if you stand your ground, your stand alone is going to break that forces. This is implied in the story right here, right? So, verse 17, then she spoke to him, her husband, Potiphar, with this word. The Hebrew slave, notice right here again, folks, whom you brought. Now, says, is this not true, folks?
She's blaming him.
Yeah, she's blaming him, and then she's mustering up people, the men of the household, whoever that this word household means, to her side. Notice the change right here. Whom you brought to us. This is not revealing, Bill, that your stand will break these demonic forces to where they have to master all the other demons, like she's doing right here. The Hebrew slave whom you brought to us. Nothing in this story, folks, tell you and I that all the other people in that household were tempting Joseph, but her. All right?
Say that again?
Nothing in the story tell you and I. None of those households, so to speak, whether men or women, were bothering Joseph, but her. But notice in this verse 17, she's mastering up all these people to come to her side. The Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came into me to make sport of me. This is powerful revelation. If you're faithful, if you're obedient, if you stand your ground, you're going to cause those demons to call out more demons.
So it doesn't say it, but do you think Joseph was telling the other slaves of the house, this girl's tempting me, she's luring me in, but I'm saying no. Do you think he might have laid the groundwork for his defense prior to that?
Good analytical on your part. It is not necessary.
Okay.
You know why it is not necessary?
Because they knew him.
God.
His testimony, his walk, what was obvious
Yeah.
to people.
Yeah.
God on his side.
See, if your testimony is like Joseph's right here, you don't need to defend yourself. You don't need to make any argument out of it. You don't. Notice right here in verse 18. And as I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled outside. So we know in verse 19 and onward, he ended up in prison.
Yeah. Yeah.
He ended up in prison, Bill.
I'm not trying to make a joke out of it, but this sounds like the history of family court. This is what guys go through. They can just make an accusation. You got to defend yourself. It takes time with honor. I know so many people, you know, myself included, that they were caught, and you know, whatever they say, this is what happens. It's incredible, and it's just, it takes time and your walk and who you are, and God will reveal it, and justice will come out of it. It's
Yeah. So what is Moses trying to tell you and I in this first 18 verses? For us men, sexual temptation, it'd be like the last stage to our maturity, to our spiritual maturity, to our spiritual growth. If you can overcome sexual temptation like Joseph did right here, you're going to eventually become the second man in command throughout Egypt.
wow. Wow.
All right.
Yeah, the road is not short because he's going to get in prison. He's going to go through many, many years of being in the prison. But eventually he became the second man next to Pharaoh himself. Sexual temptation is going to either make you or break you. And if you walk with God, God is going to eventually make you second in command of Egypt. Remember, Egypt is a symbol, a type of the devil's world. Think about that, folks. Think about that for a second. If you overcome sexual temptation consistently, God is going to give you a part of the world of the devil for you to be in charge.
Wow.
It's huge.
Woo.
It's huge, man.
Amen.
This is huge, right? So it started with a trial, and then God's touch, then your testimony, then the temptation. But if you stay with God, if you're faithful and obedient, triumph is yours for keeps. But the main thing right here is how to overcome sexual temptation. Back to these three words in verse 19. Wife, evil, sin. Look at the woman that you're looking at. Somebody else's wife. Somebody else's daughter. Look at that temptation to the picture as evil. Not something ordinary. Not something everybody is doing. And most important of all, if you fall victim to that, you've missed your mark as a Christian. And in the process, your reputation is tarnished. God's reputation is tarnished.
Wow.
This is huge.
So,
This is a great lesson.
so
Yeah.
I'm actually, my question is about Potiphar. Did he become the passive husband? I mean, it was like he stepped back, and then all of a sudden, because she said something, he had to react and put him back in jail. But he pretty much knew that Joseph was a fair, decent man.
You did. Well, what is this story telling you and I? If you're faithful and obedient, this is going to be a slap on the face of Potiphar. This is going to be a slap on the face of the chief demon that Satan put in charge of you through the sexual temptation, if you are faithful to God.
Plus, he probably had to hide, felt like he had to hide the fact that his wife was doing what she was doing anyway.
It's a lot of problems for him right now. It becomes a lot of problem than just, so to speak, putting Joseph in prison, right? So If there is one thing left in the story that we need to dig, is this word Hebrew in verse 14, repeated again in verse 17 Hebrew. Remember I said before, Egypt, Mitzrayim, double stronghold. Is this not true for sometimes amidst all the blessings that God has given us, we forgot who we actually are? Hebrew. You know what the word Hebrew means, by the way? Anybody here knows what the word Hebrew means? The word Hebrew means one who has crossed over. One who has crossed over. So in his life, he's crossed over from being a Jew to being in the Pharaoh's household. This sexual temptation came, and it's very interesting that Potiphar's wife, when she was cornered, when she found herself not winning the battle, so to speak, she called Joseph the Hebrew. What is this telling you and I? No matter the temptation you're facing, if you remember who you are, one who has crossover from death to life, crossover from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light, crossover from ignorance to understanding, you're gonna be all right. Right?